Hello and welcome back to the Brit Iron podcast. Today we are continuing with our team rankings and team previews, and today we're going with the 31st team, which is the Miami Dolphins. And today, as ever, joined by Matt and Sam. How are we today, boys?
Good, mate.
Good. Yeah, feeling good. I think we've got some good things to talk about.
Nice one, yeah. It's an exciting team, this one. I guess we'll get straight into it and start talking about the Dolphins. And the way I see this team, there's a lot of young talent in there. I see that there is 10 players that are 4-year vets. All the others are below that. So I think it's an interesting sort of format they've got going on there.
Yeah, I think definitely. They're a team they're pretty new. They've got to mesh together. They're a young team, but they're definitely putting the building blocks in place here to build something potentially quite good. They've got obviously a lot of draft capital they've used this year. More coming up. We'll go into a bit more detail on that. But I think, they're putting everything in place and not quite there yet. I think there's a bit of time for them to click, but it's definitely promising.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to be a Dolphins fan. This is probably not the year for them, which reflects in our rankings. I mean, when you see 31 out of 32 teams, it almost seems like we're just like pounding the Dolphins into the ground. But I think they're actually a really exciting team going forward. You've already touched on the fact that they've got so much youth. And, I mean, looking down the roster, they don't have a wide receiver who's over the age of 28 at the moment, which some might turn around and say that's a negative. You don't have much veterans and stuff on the team. You don't leadership qualities, all that. But I think this is a team that in a year or two, as these guys get a bit of talent, they get a bit of experience, and you keep surrounding them with talent, they've got more draft picks next year. If Tua can come in and look like he is the guy, they play in a weak division at the moment. This is a team that could really, in a year or two, we could be talking as a top 10 team in the NFL, I honestly think.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It's sort of a case of like 31 now, but next year a lot higher, or the year after much higher than that. It's so much potential. And when we're talking about potential as well, obviously they drafted Tua this year, and this is a player that has been talked about for a number of years, having a lot of talent. But when do we think he will start? Is it week 1 or maybe week 10 or maybe even next season? When do you guys reckon?
I think for me, I think they may hold off a little bit. I think it's a new offensive line. They've overhauled it, which is something they had to do, which is good. But I think you want to see how that offensive line's working out. Obviously, it's a slightly different draft process this year, different off-season. So they wouldn't have had a massive amount of time with Tua in that building and being able to check out, because obviously he's got a bit of an injury history. And I don't think you want to rush him in there too quickly and see him get blown up in the first game, and then you've lost him for the season. I think with the old Fitz magic there, it's not a massive rush. They can sort of play him, sort of get Tua ready, and then put him in when they're comfortable. I think it's maybe a slightly hot take, but I think for me, where they've also still got Rosen, if they end up carrying Rosen through, I think potentially we see Rosen, if it's before the trade deadline, they have to swap things about. I think we see Rosen, even if it's just for a game, before we see Tua, just so they can try and be like, show him what you can do.
His capital.
Get us a second round pick or a third rounder for you, and then off you go, kind of thing. But I think I wouldn't rush Tua. I think, as we said, there's a lot of things that need to mesh on this team. There's been a mass changeover, a lot of players coming in, a lot going out. So I think let everything kind of settle in, and then just gradually get Tua ready.
I think the thing with this question, for me, it's James says, when do you think he will start? I have two answers to this. There's the when do I think he will start, and when would I like him to start? I don't necessarily need to see anything from Tua this season. He's coming off of what, in some cases, could be a career-ending injury. Give him a season to sit back and hold a clipboard, watch, learn how to read defenses, learn how to go through his reads. You don't have to shove him out there. You don't want him taking hits. If you think he's your franchise guy, you can wait a year because you're going to get another 13 years out of him. But it's not the end of the world. They're not a win-now team. When I think he will start, I have a horrible feeling that they're going to rush him out as soon as they think he's healthy. I think of all the, bar Joe Burrow, of all the rookie quarterbacks, it would not shock me if he is the second one starting. I wouldn't be completely shocked if he was starting week 1. If he goes into training camp and he looks good and he's healthy and he's able to fully compete for that job, he's probably the most talented quarterback on that team. And so, although they're not in the scenario where the coaching staff have to win now or anything like that, if he is the best guy, he will be on the field. And that worries me a little bit, because if he can't get down in the same way that Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson do, then he's going to get injured because he's a smaller bodied guy. He's already coming off of one injury. And if he gets injured and that becomes a bit of a bug for him, then that could be the next 4 or 5 years of the Miami Dolphins' a window that's opening here down the drain. So I would like to see him not start, but I've got a horrible feeling that he's going to be thrown into the fire here.
Yeah, and Matt, it's interesting you mentioned Josh Rosen there as well, and potentially trading away for draft picks, because I know that this team already has a lot of draft picks next season. So this really could help with the fact that they could be like a one-to-watch team as well.
Yeah, I mean, from their point of view, I think, especially with bringing in Tua, that closes any conversation around Josh Rosen in Miami. Unless something happens with Tua and he does get injured again while Josh Rosen's still there, see him running on. But I think, they gave him as much of a shot as they could. I think it wasn't really a fair shot from his point of view. I think he's constantly seems to have been set up to fail on the worst teams in the years he's started. So I think if you can get extra draft capital, why not? Even if you've already got a lot, if you can get another decent second, third, fourth round pick in what will be deep drafts, another deep receiver class, why not?
I'd really like to see Josh Rosen go somewhere where he's got a chance to do well.
Yeah.
His first year in Arizona, he was behind the worst offensive line in the league, and he was thrown to the Wolves. Then he gets traded to Miami, where he's behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and none of these teams are playing to Josh Rosen's strengths. They're not giving him the weapons. They're not giving him the opportunity. Now, I think there are a couple of teams out there that could go out, and you wouldn't have to spend much to get a guy who has that first-round pedigree. He throws an absolutely beautiful ball, and you could probably pick him up for a fourth-round pick at the moment, which, going forward, is incredible value. I mean, imagine, say, the Steelers. Steelers pop to mind straight away. They've got a veteran quarterback in place who you could sit him behind for a year or so, and he could really learn. Big Ben's on his way out. They've got one of the best young defenses in the league. You're setting him up, and they consistently draft great receivers in good value picks, as well as running backs. That is a place where they could go. They've got a history of a good line, and you could put him in place there and see if he's got anything. And if he doesn't for a fourth round pick, then you've got a backup who can probably start a few games for you, better than anything else they've got there.
And I think what would be interesting, I'd like to see him on a decent team, because he's not often, but he has a couple of moments where he's shown a little sort of fourth quarter comeback sort of thing, or coming into a game. And I'd like to see him on a good team where he's got a line that will at least hold and give him a chance, and a couple of receiving threats who'll go and get the ball, and see what you can do there. Because I think you might find a guy that down the line turns into your sort of Case Keenum, Ryan Fitzpatrick kind of guy, where he just pops up, he'll start all over around the league, and you've got some in there, and he's sort of there if you need to give your current quarterback a bit of a kick to kind of push him on. He's the guy you bring in.
And for the Dolphins, you get great value for a pick. I mean, like we've already said, they're a young rebuilding team. They've got a lot of picks next year and a lot of high picks. They've got 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. If you pick up another pick, suddenly you've got about, I think it's like 9 or 10 picks in the draft total, 5 in the top 3 rounds. You can just surround Tua with everything he needs to win.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is exciting times in Miami. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this one plays out over the next few years for sure. But moving it back on to the Dolphins as a whole, is there any fancy players of interest on this roster right now?
I think we've definitely got a few on this roster. I think one thing that is interesting for me, which talked about a lot about the quarterbacks, it's an interesting one. If you're in a dynasty league, obviously stuff like Tua, that's fine. In a one-off this season, it's a very difficult question this early on. Obviously, we're in June. I think as we get later on, get into the preseason, start to see what more news comes out, you can start to make a call of, is it worth taking Tua or Fitzpatrick for this year? But personally, I'd hold off until we know exactly what's going on. I think outside of that, you've got Devontae Parker. If he can get on the same page, if it is Fitzmagic at the start, no worries with him there. And then if Tua comes in, if he can get on the same page and get the chemistry going, I think he could be a real steal, because I think there's going to be some drafts. Done a few mocks, and he's seemed to have fallen through for a guy who's going to be the receiver one in that offense. Could get some value on him there.
I think the big thing I'm seeing for fantasy value off of the Dolphins is streamable players. Fitzmagic, with the division that they play in, Fitzmagic, they play the Jets twice a year. At the moment, looks like the Jets might be trading Jamal Adams, who's their best player on defense, by the start of the season. That could be a really leaky secondary, which means if you've got Fitzmagic coming in, he's a streamable guy who very well can go for over 300 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns in a game like that. So that's a streamable guy. And the other streamable guy that comes straight to mind is Mike Gesicki at the tight end position. Yeah. He's not going to be one of those guys that you're taking early for tight end, but when you're in a rut or whatever, if he's on your waiver wire or you can pick him up for cheap on a trade, he is in that kind of second or third tier player who's got the potential to really break out and have a big day, which is what you're looking for.
I think if you're in a slightly deeper league as well, let's say if you're more of like a 12-team league, where it's going to be everything's a bit more spread thin, definitely someone you can pick up late on in the draft and get some value down the line. I think especially with dynasty formats, really want to keep an eye on. If you've got a deep bench, I know in our 12-team dynasty league, we've got pretty deep benches, and he's one I think has been stashed for a while since we started it last year. So I think keep an eye on him in that regard. But I think he could definitely take the leap, and this time next year, it's not a streamable guy. I'd almost put him above streamable guy. Now, if he plays to what the expectation is, I could see him being a guy you can have as your guy. He's not going to be incredible. I'm not talking about putting him in sort of that top 4 of tight ends, in that group below it, where if you need it and you haven't drafted and prioritized it early, he can do the job for you. I think the other interesting thing for me, and especially talking streamable, is the running back room.
Yeah, I was about to
Matt
mention that as
Breida, Jordan had 2 new guys to the system, 2 new running backs. It's interesting to see at the moment. It's hard to tell who's going to be the guy, but I think whichever one of them comes out on top, there'll be some value you can get there. So it's a bit of an early call to make yet, but I like both of them.
Yeah, I like them both. And the thing with Howard is, the weird thing I find with Howard is, every team he ends up at, he seems to be not wanted. He goes there, he starts, he's productive, and then they trade him or they release him. I don't quite understand that. But when you look just at his numbers, he is, since he entered the league 4 years ago, he's the 3rd highest rusher in the league. If he gets the carries, he is productive. He might not be pretty doing it, but he gets yards, he gets first downs, and he scores points. So I wouldn't be averse to picking up Howard or Breida, who is a similar player, in a later round pick to sit on your bench, who is, again, a streamable guy. Wouldn't want to rely on them week in, week out, but in the right matchup, when you've got a bye week, you're strapped at running back, or you've got injuries, then they're a guy who you can plug and play, and they're probably not going to completely put up a bust.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me with pretty much a lot of this offense and any their sort of fantasy relevance is, will this new O-line click together? Because I think if the new O-line does well, I mean, if you look at Kenyon Drake when he before and after going to the Cardinals, different player in terms of fantasy conduct, seems like a different player. Yeah. So I think if this new line can click and actually give them something to run behind, something to play behind, you might start to see one of these two guys as a potential sort of kind of guy that gets you into that playoffs when you maybe shouldn't have done because you managed to get him so late for such good value. The only risk is if it becomes a bit of a coin flip of you never know which one's playing. Like we had it Ronald Jones, Peyton Barber last year. None of them were massively relevant because it was you didn't know who you were getting. You'd have them both for like odd snaps here and there. It was being changed in and out all the time. If it starts to go that way and it's not predictable, then it's something to potentially just be a bit cautious around and avoid. But it's early days to see.
Yeah, I suppose for the running back room, it is just a sort of wait and see. It's hard to make a call right now on who is going to be the guy, like you say. However, I believe that is all we have got time for today. So thank you, boys, for your time, and thank you all for listening. Please go check us out on YouTube. Go like, comment, subscribe. Check us out on Instagram as well. We're at the Brit Iron. Also on Twitter as well under the same handle, which is quite exciting. And we're also setting up a follower league as well, where we like to get you guys involved and see how you draft and see how your sort of picks develop and see how your season goes, really. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.